Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the second chapter of Peter's second epistle. And here it really gets to the heart of the matter of the epistle, which is the presence of heresy. So in the first book of Peter, we read of the how to deal with persecution. That is an external virus, but there's also an internal virus, which is false teaching. So both the Peters balance the both those negative aspects and how to deal with them. And one of the mistakes we've been making more than we should lately is by reading too much of the chapter which comes before it. So we have a lot to cover, and we want to cover it all in one lesson. So we're just going to keep our preview to the customary minimum. What comes in the first chapter is just kind of the fruits we are to cultivate, the character traits we are to cultivate on the path to salvation, and this brings us, it takes a sudden positive turn from the juxt of Hebrews with the positive traits we are to develop at once and simultaneously. So a lot of people interpret it as such as add to faith uprightness. You don't need to add to your faith uprightness. You need to have uprightness at the same time, and all the rest, and all, etc. Then we read, for the purpose of it all is to everlasting life. That is the motivation and incentive as declared in the 11th verse. Then I divided this chapter in two, but there's no sharp break. This is one common theme. That's one of the reasons I want to combine this in one, is sort of an explanation. We read, for we did not follow cleverly devised stories. This is one of the ways of the heretics, of whom we're going to meet and hear. We hear that word once again. So he's saying this in the verse 16 in defense, and certainly a great example of apologetics for the inerrancy and inspiration of Scripture, which really begins in the 16th verse and lasts all the way to the 21st. We did comment on that recently. We recommend that you do some thinking on it yourself, or you can go to that video when you're done here, Corey Johnston, 2 Peter 1, 12 to 21. But for now, we're just going to concentrate with the opening verse, which reads, "But there also came to be false prophets among the people, as also there are among you there shall be false prophets, who shall secretly bring in destructive heresies, and deny the master who brought them, bringing swift destruction on themselves." So there is nothing new and nothing in any age of the religious deception with false teachers, these people who masquerade in the clothes of religion to bring about destructive heresies and bring others to their own doom. So if a blind man follows the blind, if you don't know where you're going and you fall into the traps of one of these teachers, guess what? You're going to fall into a ditch. So they are a real presence. They are nothing new to Christianity. They seem to have accelerated in our generation, at least the ones I'm familiar with. There's this whole churchianity, corporate worldly culture that is kind of corrupting a lot of Christian ministries. I won't say Christianity itself, because that is not Christianity itself. And so the true authentic faith never remains untainted in spite of the presence of being surrounded by heresies which destroy and ruin and doom those who follow them, and those who teach them especially. One of the consequences of being entrusted to teacher is the accompanying responsibility and accountability for how you handled that responsibility. So you have to answer it just for like anything else, but it does invite a greater degree of caution for one's eternal welfare. Second verse, "And many shall follow their destructive ways, because of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. And in greed with fabricated words they shall use you for gain. From of old their judgment does not linger, and their destruction does not slumber." So that's a single sentence, two verses. In the second verse, he says, these people will attract an audience because people with itching ears will always generate them the filthy lucre they crave, the riches. That's what they're using them for, and they're going to diminish, they're going to blaspheme the way of truth. That's capitalized way, so that we recognize that to be the way, truth, and the life in John 14:6. So that's a personal blasphemy against the man Peter had walked with and had been blessed by and empowered by and had the ever-present example even after his death in the form of the Spirit. But these heretics in verse 3 are motivated by gain and greed. And when one covets and one steals, they do it with fabricated words. So they are lying. They are not just sinning in one. They are not just violating one of the commandments of the Decalogue. They are violating pretty much all of them. They're engaged in blasphemy. They sell idolatry, moral. They invent their own conception of God. Just kind of do your own thing. So, the one who stands in the way of that is the one who judges them. The one who they're ignoring and diminishing and blaspheming is the one to whom they have to answer to. So their judgment is certain. It does not linger, and their destruction does not slumber. So that means it's going to be inevitable. It's going to be irresistible. It's going to come because of the way you decided to live this life and the teachings you decided to teach or embody and follow and embrace. So religion is a serious matter. For if Yahweh did not spare the angels who sinned, but sent them to Gehenna and delivered them into chains of darkness to be kept for judgment, and did not spare the world of old, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness, and 7 others, bringing in the flood on the world of the wicked, and having reduced to ashes the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, condemned them to destruction, having made them an example to those who afterward would live wickedly, and rescued righteous Lot, who was oppressed with the indecent behavior of the lawless. For day after day that righteous man, dwelling among them, tortured his righteous soul by seeing and hearing their lawless works. So that's a single sentence. We're just going to reread what we've read. We just wanted to have that uninterrupted flow for the sake of one of the things that the divisions of the Bible into chapter and verse does is interrupt sentences. So the original arrangement of the Bible itself is in paragraph form. They were written on scrolls. It wasn't until 1328 until that artificial but useful division came in. So they have the example in the pre-mortal existence. I mean, before the foundation of the earth, there was, or after the foundation of the earth is the most likely plausible launching point for Lucifer's rebellion, because after that, God declared everything very good, and then suddenly everything became bad. Why? Because the supreme magnificent being rebelled, and he drew a third of the angels down with them. We deduce this from passages such as somewhere in between the first 3 verses of the 12th chapter of Revelation, the stars which fall. And he brought a third of the angels down with them. And also in the book of Revelation, somewhere we read that there are 100 million angels in heaven. So you do the math on what's 33% of that is, and that would be about 50 million, million angels. But I'm not good at math, but they are there, and if they are judged, they are creatures of agency who are given the gift of moral choice and moral response. And if they have to answer for their life, so too must we, because we have the same agency. And the Gehenna is just the Greek term for hell. It would have been the place of death, and they are kept there for judgment. And he didn't. When the world got too wicked because of the fall, the Lucifer-induced fall, Satan assumed the certain, he crept into the garden, and the fall effects on the antediluvian period were more intense and devastating than that which came after it. That which came is likened elsewhere to a baptism by Peter, I believe, in the first epistle, the cleansing of the earth. And through that cleansing, it's also a story of restoration. So humanity and civilization and everything else was renewed and replenished from the cleansing of this earth through this young one man who was a preacher of righteousness. By that detail, we can imagine that during the 120 years that this man was standing on the ark, he was calling others that judgment is coming, get yourself in the ark. But they refused to believe because there literally it was the first occasion of rain, because in Genesis 2:4 we read that the earth was initially replenished from the ground up. So there had never been rain before, and then all of a sudden this happened, and the only people left alive, only humans left alive, are 8 others who also preserve all land animal life forms. And that resulted in the world of the wicked. It was no more, but it became wicked not long after, almost immediately, but the promise remained in the form of the rainbow. Every time we see a rainbow, we have a reminder that God will never destroy the earth with a flood ever again. And speaking of that, we read of righteous Lot, who was impressed with the indecent behavior of lawless. Incidentally, I know it doesn't say Sodom and Gomorrah, so that is the perversion and the corruption of the rainbow that we are witnessing today. It is a symbol of the LGBT community who have hijacked it for selfish causes when it's not theirs to begin with. It is all of ours. It is not their symbol alone. And the visual symbols of divinity's promise to us are not ours to take and do with whatever we want. It was declared in the Bible, the sign from us to him, and I'm more concerned about the stuff which precipitated the flood. So that sin was alive and well in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, which were ancient epicenters of iniquity, the classic cases of Old Testament fire and brimstone. They were destroyed in them to make an example. So that's why they were destroyed in the flickering of an eye, in a moment, a twinkling of an eye, in a moment in time. They were destroyed as an example and a warning to other people, so that you can't just do whatever you want, and agency does carry consequences. But in that city was righteous Lot. I know Lot doesn't necessarily have the most positive reputation amongst Christians, but to the Jewish people in the book of Wisdom of Solomon, that's an intertestamental book attributed to not the Solomon, but us Solomon, and he speaks positive praise of Lot in that. And even though he was oppressed by these angels, he was hosting angels, and they came to his door baying for these male guests of his for gay sex, and he offers them his daughters, but the Sodomites are intent on sodomizing his male guest, and he does struggle with them, and eventually the angels do escape and bring the devastating judgment. So they kind of made the wrong move towards the one within whose hand lay the power of their sudden, swift, and total destruction. So for day after day, that righteous man dwelling among them tortured his righteous soul by seeing and hearing their lawless works. So what's interesting is that Lot was in Sodom and Gomorrah by his own election when the division of the pasture, when he was his uncle Abraham's traveling companion, and also the father of the Moabite nation, which I think he doesn't have necessarily a great reputation in Christian circles, because the Moabites were perpetual nuisances and idolaters to the Israelites. But where were we? Seeing, just the sight and the sound and being surrounded by sin was sufficiently revolting. So it's comparable to a process of torture for a righteous man to be in a den of iniquity, an epicenter of iniquity. And when Abram prays for it, he says, if there be 50, and then he eventually winnows the number down to 10, and there were not even 10 innocent people left worth sparing from the judgment which had to come. And Next, verse 9, Yahweh knows how to rescue the reverent ones from trial and to keep the unrighteous unto the day of judgment to be punished. This would have been extremely relevant to Peter's initial audience, who we learn from his first disciples were contending with the very real and present danger of persecution for being Christians and being in the world at the same time. It's the price we pay for living in the world we live. The world belongs to the devil. Satan is the god of the earth, the ruler of the air. But if we are righteous and reverent, if we are worshipful in the highs and the lows, in the thick and thin, then we will be delivered. So we don't have to necessarily go through as much as Peter's audience to accomplish our sanctification, but there may come a test in our lifetime as the end times approach, where we will, the tribulation. And mostly of all those walking after the flesh and filthy lust, despising authority, bold, headstrong, speaking evil of esteemed ones. So these people are loudmouths. They are, just laws unto themselves, and when you are a law unto yourself, authorities of others gets in the way, so you have to despise it and ideally discard it. So that's what these false teachers were preaching. They were preaching revolt against all authority, whether political. You don't need leaders, you don't need rules, you just do what you want to do. This is and in filthy lust. Lust is just they're motivated by their lust. It's their ungovernable passions, which they're walking in the flesh, in the world. So they are entrapped by all three of our spiritual enemies. We have three enemies as Christians: the world, the flesh, the devil, the latter of which is constantly trying to get the middle of which to manipulate to the first. So he wants us walking according to our lust in the world as we find it, because he is the temporary deity in control of the earth as we find it. They're such loud mouths that they speak evil even of ones who are esteemed. So their estimation, there's an implicit dichotomy between their own and that of Elohim's. So the ones who the whole world reviles are actually beloved, treasured, and esteemed in heaven by Yahweh. Whereas angels who are greater in strength and power do not bring a slanderous accusation against them before the Master. So that's the final verse of our sentence there. And there we read that angels are superiorly endowed creatures. They were created with superior capacities to our own. And if they are liable to blasphemy, that means so too are we. So this all ties back to the opening sentence when he tied it into hell is the ultimate aim, and they follow the one who, the very reason that hell was created was to send Lucifer down, and then his mission and purpose in life became to bring as many people down of Yahweh's beloved creatures as he is able, and he knows that his time is short, and he is lashing out. And we're actually going to cut it a little early today because we can't really run the risk of condensing this in 30 minutes. We got a lot to say. That's not everything we'd like to say, so what we're going to do is cut this in half. I know it's not the way it planned, it's just the way it worked out. I'll see you soon. I'll see you next time. We'll do one of these soon. So I'll see you then. I'll see you before then, and take care until then. Bye-bye.